What comes to your mind when you hear these words? Bay of Pigs? A group of swine swimming and floating bloodily in the midst of an armed standoff between machine gun-wielding US troops and the guerrilla-trained Cubans somewhere in swine swamp Haram beaches, somewhere in the Caribbean? No, it's nothing like that. When we expected it to be loud and cackling, it ended in a soft, clandestine whisper of failure. A remarkable failure, nonetheless. In April of 1961, America's greatest defeat, the perfect failure, happened on Cuba's Bay of Pigs at the heights of the Cold War, when some 1,400 CIA-trained Cuban exiles attempted to invade their homeland. It spectacularly failed, and the survivors were captured by Fidel Castro's army. Kennedy said, no, we had nothing to do with the invasion. But the US government's involvement in covert financing and directing the invasion had been caught momentarily. A nation of 7 million people humiliated the 180 million strong US in such a disastrous degree that it led to drastic changes in international relations among Cuba, the US, and the Soviet Union forever. Fidel Castro was hailed as the national hero, and it also tucked Cuba a closer tie with the Soviets. Kennedy's assassination, Vietnam War, and Watergate came as fallout after the incident. Let's take a look at the brief history. John F. Kennedy, at 43, was the youngest man ever to win the presidency of the U.S. in January 1961. The U.S. at the time was locked in petulant conflict with communist countries all over the world. Soviets at that time were charging for control of Berlin. The Chinese had advanced into Vietnam and Laos, and the Reds had landed on the Isle of Cuba. And Yuri Gagarin had been orbiting Earth in a spacecraft. Jealous and restless, I think. Earlier, in 1959, Fidel Castro, with a guerrilla army, overthrew the military dictatorship under Fulgencio Batista and proclaimed the new administration over Cuba. Fidel Castro, in 1960, nationalized all foreign assets in Cuba, hiked taxes on U.S. imports, and established trade deals with the Soviets. There is nothing more that can anger the U.S. than some country having relations with the Soviets. Dwight D. Eisenhower, the president before Kennedy, retaliated by cutting the import quota for Cuban sugar, froze Cuban assets in the U.S., and imposed a trade embargo that restricted any diplomatic ties with the Castro government. The U.S. chokehold over Cuba was really stifling. After Castro repeatedly condemned the U.S. for its misdeeds in Cuba for the past 60 years, many U.S. officials began to view him as a national threat. The National Security Act of 1947 established the Central Intelligence Agency as a product of the Cold War, and as a countermeasure, the espionage activities of the Soviet Union's KGB. There had been increasing demands to do something about these outrageous communists that flourished so close to the US. Eisenhower supported the CIA's plan to bring about the replacement of the Castro regime with one more devoted to the true interests of the Cuban people and more acceptable to the US. The plan was inherited by the then recently elected President Kennedy, and his operational approval came very soon. Aircrafts had been acquired as anti-Castro efforts depended on the success of these aircrafts. Fleets of ships set sail from Nicaragua for the invasion on the night of April 14, 1961. 3 Cuban airfields situated just 26 kilometers away from Havana were attacked by 8 B-26B Invader bombers on 15th of April, which were painted to look like Cuban Air Force planes. Many of them missed their targets, and the Cuban aircrafts remain intact. Photos of the repainted U.S. planes later became public and revealed American support for the invasion. Late on April 16th, the CIA Brigade 2506 invasion fleet converged on Rendezvous Point Zulu, some 60 kilometers south of Cuba, loaded with troops, arms, and supplies. Components of the Brigade 2506 landed on the Bay of Pigs on the southern coast of Cuba, carrying 1,400 Cuban exiled ground troops and tanks. As the frogmen landed, a firefight broke out when a jeep carrying Cuban militia happened by. Cuban planes shelled the invaders, sank 2 escort ships, and destroyed half of the Exiles' air support. They were defeated within 2 days by Cuban armed forces under the direct command of Castro. 114 were killed and over 1,100 were taken prisoner, a spectacularly swift failure. On April 19th, at least 7 Cubans plus 2 CIA-hired citizens were executed after a 2-day trial. Between April and October 1961, hundreds of executions took place in response to the invasion. On the 29th of March, 1962, 1,179 men were put on trial for treason. All of them were convicted and were sentenced to 30 years of prison. Castro and James B. Donovan, a CIA legal officer, yes, the one played by Tom Hanks from Spielberg's Bridge of Spies, signed an agreement to exchange 1,113 prisoners for $53 million in food and medicine. The U.S. denied any involvement at first. Che Guevara sent a note to Kennedy. Before the invasion, the revolution was weak. Now, it's stronger than ever. The failed invasion strengthened the position of Castro's administration, which proceeded to openly proclaim its intention to adopt socialism and pursue closer ties with the Soviet Union. The Kennedy administration imposed a complete trade embargo on Cuba. Cuba, whose economy greatly depended on trade with the United States, lost approximately $130 billion over the next 60 years. The Kennedy administration became very aggressive in regards to overthrowing Castro following the failure, reportedly doubling its efforts. CIA Director Allen Dulles, CIA Deputy Director Charles P. Cabell, and Deputy Director for Plans Richard Bezell were all forced to resign by early 1962. This invasion reinforced the already held belief in Cuba that the Americans could not be trusted. It did not go so well for Kennedy, too. Although the Warren Commission stated that Lee Harvey Oswald had acted alone in killing Kennedy, the CIA Kennedy assassination theories suggested that Kennedy had been killed due to his firing of CIA Director Allen Dulles, his refusal to provide air support to the Bay of Pigs invasion, his plan to cut the agency's budget by 20%, and the belief that the president was weak on communism. The Vietnam War and Watergate scandal came after this. Well, this is it. The first great defeat of Yankee imperialism in Latin America. Subscribe to the channel. Go to buymeacoffee.com/chongtham to donate.